Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Make sure you look at how long this episode is before you start so that you know you have time to get through it. I haven't even recorded it all yet, but I know it's going to be a minute. So get ready for my top tips for Apex. These are my daily tips, stuff that I do every single game, stuff I'm always thinking of that I think need to be on the back of your mind as well to help take your gameplay from where you're at to the next level. So we're going to be looking into looting, gunfights, and positioning, and this will be broken up into sections. So I will put timestamps in the description so that you know when looting is, when gunfights are, and when positioning are, if you want to skip ahead. Let's get into it. Looting. Looting is very situational, but after surviving the drop, what do? Well, this is after you've either won your first fight, you know there's no teams with you, no one's pushing you, you have no signs to expect combat. This is what I recommend. So before going out looking for trouble, I suggest that you go out looking for loot. Fight who you must on the way, but don't be afraid to run if you come across too many teams or one team that's too good. Now, there's 2 to 3 schools of thought on this. There's either aggressive gameplay, defensive gameplay, or the mix of the two. I typically try to be a mix of the two, but I definitely lean more defensive, so some of this advice may sound kind of off to some of you if you're the more aggressive type. So aggressive gameplay would be picking fights to get loot, making the enemy teams do the looting for you and you just grabbing it from their box. This is typically reserved for teams with great synergy and great skill. This is high risk, high reward. It's very effective and will always get you ready for the end game. If you can get there, you may not. Then there's the polar opposite of this, which is defensive gameplay, which would be avoiding all conflict you can, only fighting to survive, and making sure that you always have a means to run away. And this would be, it's not the worst, right? It means that you're scouring the map, running around looking for loot the entire time, constantly avoiding teams. It is as much effort as being aggressive. What do I mean by that? Well, obviously, defensive gameplay is easier than being an aggressive gamer. That's not what I'm quite saying. It's that in order to truly be peak defensive or peak aggressive, then you have to have very intimate map knowledge and be very situationally aware about where teams could be, where teams might be, and moving on. And so it's the same mental effort to avoid teams as it is to find them. So you won't truly be able to take full advantage of defensive or aggressive gameplay if you're not having the situational awareness and map knowledge of where these teams are. And this goes way beyond audio cues. So the mix that most players end up being is defensive when they get around very high-skilled teams, and then aggressive when they have advantages, get a knock, get a break, or just feel like their team can pull this off if they're on a hot streak. And that's where most players are going to end up lying. But if you want to start doing consistently better one way or the other, then you need to start working on situational awareness, map knowledge, and getting the rhythm down based off of where the dropship is, where most teams land, where the zone is pulling from, the points of interest, and where the most common locations for enemies to be, and where that is in relation to the ring and where the ring's closing to. So circling back to defensive gameplay, is that defensive gameplay would be avoiding all conflict you can, only fighting to survive, and you will always make it to the end game. If you're a good defensive player, you will always make it to the end game, but you're rarely prepared for it, and any team worth their merit will likely make easy work of you. There are times this is called for, especially in ranked. Preserving your RP is always the most important thing you could do, but I'm going to abide by a balance of the two, looting until I get my favorite guns and high enough shields, and then fighting for the perfect loadout in time for endgame. So what do I mean by that? So I mean that I'll loot until I find, blue, maybe even purple bod, and then I'll loot until I can get my favorite guns. And those guns don't necessarily need to have the right attachments, but an optic and the gun at the very minimum as for me wanting to push a fight and feeling prepared. I start getting into the endgame mindset when there's either less than 6 squads left or round 4. And by then, I want to have my perfect loadout. All the attachments I can get, my favorite optics, everything I possibly could. And if you succeed faster than that, then consider defensive play focused on defending key positions. Don't be afraid to butt out of fights, especially if you just want to make endgame, because your kills are going to mean more in endgame, especially in ranked. So don't be afraid just to sit idly by and wait and relax and be patient and wait for people to come to you. Additionally, if you want to be a bit more aggressive while still having that defensive mindset, what you can do is deny access to certain routes and force other teams to fight. This is typically known as gatekeeping, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But What you're going to want to do is look at the map and see where enemy teams where you know the location of are going to have to go to. So if you see two teams fighting or hear two teams fighting and you can tell that they're out of the next ring, then consider taking a defensive position, waiting for them to have to move as the ring comes in, because especially by round 4 or even just round 3, fighting the ring and you gets very, very deadly. The ring will start doing 10 damage per tick by round 3. This means that that team outside the ring is chasing the clock and having to fight you. So they have a limited amount of time that they can stay in ring, which means if you can apply enough pressure and make them keep having to heal, then they will have to push you without full health, which is exactly what you want. Additionally, denying access from a route and making a team rotate, if they have to choose between fighting you and rotating away, you might be pushing them into another team that you can then third party. So denying routes and letting a team know where you are and say, hey, you either can fight the ring and me or you can leave, then that will cause them to potentially run into other squads, especially late in the game when the ring is not that big. So we're going to get into my list of looting priorities. Once you've survived the drop, what we were going to start talking about 4 minutes ago before that rant. Then now we're going to start getting into my actual detailed list of what are you looking for and what should you prioritize the most above anything else. First on the list is body shields and batteries. The more health you have, the more options you have. The less health you have, the less you can push fights or sustain combat, making running away to fight another day the only option for winning the game. The more health and batteries you have, the longer you can prolong engagements and try to turn the fight in your favor, or even bait a third party if that's what you're trying to do. We talk about looting body shields from death crates in this video up here, so make sure that if you don't know how to do that yet, that you can go check out our other video below. Next is helmets and weapons. Well, why are these two with each other? They seem like very different things, and it's going to depend on what kind of player you are. Both are very important, but for new players, you need to pick weapons. But if you keep getting high-skilled enemies, make sure you look for at least a level 2 helmet, because you can't work on your accuracy if you keep getting killed. So get the gear that you need to buy you time to land your shots. For new players, other new players won't hit headshots, so get your guns first. Don't forget to keep in mind my top 9 recommended guns. There's a link for that video right here, and make sure to grab any highlighted attachments for your guns. Highlighted items in death crates means that that item is an upgrade for what is currently on your gun. If a white attachment appears highlighted, it means you're missing all tiers of that attachments. However, optics will always appear highlighted, so be sure to remember what you have on each gun. Don't forget that you can switch weapons while looting a death crate, and that selecting an optic will apply it to the gun that you have equipped. If your other gun has no optic, then the current optic will shift to that gun that is not equipped, and the optic that you selected will be equipped to the gun that you did have equipped. If that did not make sense, listen to it again, because this next thing definitely won't make sense if that first thing didn't make sense. When using a death crate, if you want to put an optic on your equipped gun, but your secondary weapon cannot equip the optic that you currently have on your gun, then when you equip the optic from the death crate, then the optic that was on your current gun will be placed back into the death crate or into your backpack, depending on if your backpack has space. Next, if you want to grab a gun from a death crate, then keep in mind that any attachments on your current weapon that can be placed on the new weapon will be automatically placed on the new weapon for you. This also means that if you have weapon attachments in your backpack that can be equipped to your new weapon, once you equip that weapon, it will automatically pull the attachments from your bag and place them on the gun. If the attachments that were on your current weapon cannot be placed on the new weapon, they will be put into the death crate instead. The weapon attachments can, however, be put onto your secondary, should your secondary be able to take those attachments as an upgrade. So now that you can pick your fights and win them, it's time to make that easier, and we do this with backpacks. They're very, very important, especially having at least a level 2 bag. The bags are going to let you carry more heals to buy you time, more ammo to take fights back to back, and grenades to make enemies shift from cover. Be sure to watch our video on backpacks to know my recommended setup for a level 3 bag. I do not use a lot of grenades, so adapt your playstyle accordingly, but toward the endgame I do pick up more. So next up is heat shields and mobile respawn beacons. At this point in the game, you have gear, you have guns, and you have heals. But if you play the edge of ring, be sure to carry heat shields. But if you prefer to play the center of the ring and always move early, then get a mobile respawn beacon for when that gets some of your team killed. Then consider playing the edge and rotating inward instead of running a straight path to the center every ring close. This is a general rule. There will always be times to cut a path to the center, and we will talk about positioning later. team of 3, always carry 1 beacon and 2 stacks of shields. In duos, it will depend on your team, so see what you prefer. Remember that heat shields are horrible for combat. If there are any cryptos, lifelines, Gibraltars, or revenants on the team, give them the beacon. All of these legends have some sort of shield or protection when using the beacon itself, or in the case of Lifeline, she is the most equipped to keep the team alive and is generally the last alive kind of legend. So Crypto needs the mobile respawn beacon because he can use his drone to activate the respawn beacon itself. So once he calls in the beacon, Crypto can run away and then from cover use the drone to fly up to the beacon itself and then activate it that way. If you're playing Gibraltar, be sure to use your dome shield to cover the beacon so that you don't get sniped, and as well as protect your teams when they land. It will last long enough to do both. If you're playing Revenant, don't be afraid to use Death Protection to use the respawn beacon itself. You don't want to get killed while doing this. It can be a good idea to leave your totem far away, use Death Protection, run up to the respawn beacon, and use it there. If you get shot, you'll be behind cover, have time to heal, and your teammates don't want to use it when they land. Ideally, when you land from mobile respawn beacon, you land and run because teams will push. Using Death Protection will just get you killed again. So if you're a teammate of a Revenant and he uses his totem to call you back in, do not get the totem yourself, just leave. Ideally, Revenant's totem is a more aggressive tool, but don't be afraid to use it defensively as well. It's nothing a few ultimate accelerants can't fix, and it's definitely worth using it this way to make sure that your team can make it to the end game or get positioned for a win. You don't want to be losing a game because some guy got a Kraber end game and then sniped you off the beacon. Last up is the only 2 things left, knockdown shields and ultimate accelerants. These are the things that you want to be looking for at the very end. Like it's okay, you can go the whole game without needing these things for the most part. It's not bad to have them. If you find them, you can hold on to them, but ultimate accelerants are going to replace grenades in your bag, not ammo, not heals. Knockdown shields are not bad to have early on, but they're not super important because they have time to get respawned, but at endgame you don't. So you need to make sure that by endgame you have level 2, level 3 knockdown shield. This is not hard to do. Just looting death crates will get you probably level 2, even level 3 most of the time by endgame. So you don't need to go out of your way to craft a knockdown shield. You'll get a good enough one eventually. But this is also more about just buying your team a few seconds to help. Don't expect to crawl away or use self-revive in the end game because you won't really be able to. It's very, very rare that you'll even be able to finish the self-revive, and if you do finish the self-end game, the odds of you being able to get away and heal and come back for the win are very, very low. I recommend using the self-revive as a way to get to endgame, not a way to clutch endgame. It's not Warzone. So we're going to cover positioning now, and this is fairly hard to discuss generically without specific examples, but I'm going to do my best. So here are some basic rules to cover what you should look for and what you should not look for in positions. Generally speaking, high ground is an advantage. There are ways that high ground is not an advantage and ways that you will want to give up the high ground, but generally speaking, always try to keep the high ground the best you can. It's very fast to move inward and down, but it's very slow to move outward and up. High ground does not necessarily need to have cover. If the high ground is high enough where you can back away deep into the high ground itself and break line of sight for where you expect enemies to be, then that high ground does not need to have actual cover because you can turn the height into cover itself. You do need to make sure that you recognize what positions are higher up than your current position if your high ground does not have any cover. After a fight from the high ground, consider rotating to a position that can beat your last one because third parties will be looking for where they last heard you and where they last saw you. So if you have high ground that's weak to a different position, then after winning a fight from that high ground, rotate to the new position that has the drop and advantage on your old position. That way, if there's a third party, you're even more prepared. The high ground will also almost always be on the edge of ring, and time will not be your friend. Make quick work of the team below or leave before you're forced to leave. Remember that any position you give up is a position that your enemies will likely use against you. So when you're on the high ground and you win that fight, it might be worth waiting a minute to make sure that no third parties come, or if you cannot afford to wait and you must push on that loot, defend it the best you can. Use any defensive legend and any defensive abilities that you have at your disposal to make sure that you can defend that position better than the team before. Be wary of taking the high ground by force. Sometimes that can cost you an arm and a leg. Location, location, location. Generally speaking, rule number 2 is going to be never take a fight in the open. If you can avoid the fight and get to cover, then always do so. But if you will die before getting to cover, then you need to turn and fight. Don't run, because it won't matter if you're dead. Rule number 3 is learn to play the low ground. The low ground can be an amazing advantage if you have enough cover and if you have the right legends. Generally speaking, the low ground won't be on the edge of ring, so that's the huge advantage that the low ground produces is time. You have time to wait out your enemies, so just make sure that you hold off a push and don't over peek, and you'll be fine. The loudest team and the least covered team is more likely to be third-partied first, and the ring will almost always pull to you, and a moving team will not as easily shoot back. If the team on the high ground starts fighting another team, make it a two-front war and consider pushing. You also could use this as an opportunity to run, or just in general create an opportunity to run so that you can get to a position that has the advantage that you need to win that fight. It won't ever matter how good your position is if you're in the middle of two teams. It is better to take a worse or lesser position if it means not being in the middle. Both teams can never shoot anyone except you. You must rotate away, even if it means leaving cover. Defending your cover won't matter if you're going to die. So let one team take it and then rotate to put them in the middle. The third team will think that they pushed and are fighting you. Then those two teams will fight and you can third party instead of dying. The one way that you can be in the middle of two teams is by making a triangle out of all three positions. Never let it be a straight line. Get as much distance away from those two teams as you possibly can. Make sure that if one team pushes you, the other team can see it and shoot them on the way. With 4 teams, make a square. Help another team kill one side and then rotate to make it a triangle. Then damage both sides, ideally making it a 1v1 on the remaining teams before closing in for the win. Always finish downed enemies, because no matter who knocked them, it will help the game end in a more advantageous way. At this stage, it's not about kills, it's about the win. So don't let them get revived so you can get the kill later, because that person might come back fully healed to get you instead. Next up is that it does not need to be the end game for you to use any of the tips in 1 through 4. Generally speaking, movement is life. You should always be moving to the next power position. Each ring close will show you the next best place. Find it and make a plan to take it. Rule number 6 is gatekeeping. It can be very effective and very deadly. Gatekeeping is the practice of holding the edge of the play zone and trapping enemies outside of the play zone, making them take ring damage. Usually, but not limited to, narrow passageways that require a large effort to avoid. The more damage the ring does, the more effective this is. Additionally, when done for too long, the team attempting to gatekeep can be pinched in the middle of a new team coming in and the team that they're trying to gatekeep. This will almost never result in the gatekeeping team winning, so you should always run if you can. It will also very rarely result as the team inside the ring taking the win. Most of the time, it is the new team coming in from the back that will end up winning that fight. Rule number 7 is don't panic. If you and another team are fighting outside the play zone, don't panic unless round 3 is closing. Then panic and run like hell. You won't survive the ring. Rounds 1 to 2 can be just fine, since the ring will do at most 3 damage per tick until round 3 closes. And this can be easily out-healed, and heat shields will make reviving even easier. Watch your inventory and make sure you can be in the ring for a prolonged period of time. It is better to fight an enemy team in the ring from proper position than be killed in the open if you can sustain the ring damage. The second you see an opening to run or finish them off, take it without hesitation. You will not get another chance. Lastly, we're going to cover gunfights and how to increase your chances of winning them. Remember that the right loot and positioning will make this easier already, but now we want to make winning more consistent and repeatable. Okay, pushing. When do we push? When do we not push? Well, personally, I don't push until I get 2 enemies cracked at the same time, or if I get 1 knocked. Be sure you're close enough to engage the team before they can heal or before they can revive. You will have 5 seconds to see the situation and push as a team. Never push solo unless you're the last member alive. It is better to miss this chance and create a new one than push the enemy one at a time and uncoordinated. Be patient and be a team. It is okay to stop a push if the enemy does too much damage to you on the way there. Keep an eye on your health and let your teammates know if you need to stop and heal. Don't be afraid to call off the push. Someone will need to do it. 100 health can be enough, but know your skill level and know the enemy. If they seem better than you, you will need all the health you can get. If they're not weak, don't do it. This third one's pretty obvious. If you can't shoot, don't peek from cover. Use your ears and not your eyes. If you can see them, they can shoot you. So try to be fully reloaded, ADS'd, and healed before peeking. Create, cover, and block entrances when you can. Bangler smoke is a great way to break line of sight. Use it as often as you can. Players, knocked players, death crates, rampart walls, caustic traps, Loba's black market, Revenant's totem, Horizon's black hole, and Watson's pylons can block doors from opening. Doors will not close perfectly until the blockage is removed, so plan accordingly. Do not open that door unless you don't plan on it to close again. Double doors were opened separately, so you need to block from the middle of the door to jam both. Tip number 5 is for new players. Don't miss. Better to hit the enemy in the chest than miss the head. Let the recoil hit headshots, aim for the chest, the recoil will walk its way up from the chest to the head. Focus on where they're going. Make sure that you're keeping on target, you're focused on where they're moving left or right, if they're moving up, if they're moving down. Keep on target, track that target as best you can, but always aim for the chest and then let the recoil do the rest. Next up is healing, and many things about healing. This is going to be a longer one, so stay tuned. You don't have to leave your position to heal. Repositioning may be the best way to heal, but the better you can get at realizing the time it will take for your enemies to reach you is fantastic, and you will need to use this as often as possible, and this depends on the legend that they are. So getting to know Octanes, Valkyries, Horizons, Pathfinders, and how quickly they can close position, and what the environment will do to benefit those legends in reaching you. Above all else, remember that a power position is a power position no matter how close the enemy gets. Healing and making a stand may be the best or only option. They will be expecting a low health opponent, so use that to your advantage and only try this with a 1v1. Otherwise, leave if you are able. Winning a 2v1 in Apex is still very, 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 very difficult. If you leave and they see you, expect them to chase. Definitely just always expect them to chase. Hopefully they don't see you. If you see a Bloodhound on the enemy team, you will need to block a door to heal. You cannot hide from that Bloodhound. Unless that Bloodhound is horrible at this game, you will not be able to hide from Bloodhound. So either keep running until the team chasing you runs into another team, or then block a door, try to do your best to be ready to turn and fight, because you will not be able to hide from that Bloodhound. You will have to either turn and fight from blocking a door and healing, or you will need to keep running to make sure that the enemy team runs into another team to fight instead of you. Always block doors when healing, but remember that thermite grenades will damage you and go through the door very quickly. But all grenades are going to be bad news for you, and all grenades are definitely bad news for the door, so get to cover and get ready to shoot, because they will be coming through. Next is to never corner yourself unless you have no other options. You don't want to be in a position with no escape route if you can avoid it. No escape route means you're on borrowed time. This is something you should always be thinking about. Holding a building can often mean no escape routes. The risk and other options will be very situational, and ultimately you'll need to choose whether or not you want to take that risk. Last up is always assume your enemies will flank and approach from multiple directions. Do this to them before they do it to you. My preferred method I call the 2-for-1 sale, also called the buy 2 get 1 free, where 2 teammates engage on one flank and overwhelm one side. When the enemy team is focused on them, the solo who wraps around one of the side flanks, either left or right, will start to shoot from cover at a 90-degree angle from the enemy's current position. This leaves the enemy with two choices: kill the solo to maintain cover, or leave cover, exposing themselves to all three of you. If one of the teammates in the pair gets knocked, the solo will need to rotate back to help stop the enemy from pushing. Additionally, if the solo gets knocked, the team will need to rotate to the solo to help stop a finish, or potentially leave that solo and have to come back for the banner and hope that they can win that fight at a later period of time. This strategy will basically always depend on the position that the solo can take. You only ever want to do this strategy if it means that for the enemy to push you means that your teammates can have line of sight and engage the enemy while the enemy is trying to push up on your position, because they will push you instead of your team. You will be basically sacrificing yourself unless you hit your shots, and unless your teammates can put damage on them while they attempt to push you. That's the most important part. And you also need to make sure that you have distance between you and the enemy team. This is something that you don't want to get jump padded on. You want to make sure you have range between you and them. And so this also means that it will take time. This strategy will take time to implement, and you need to make sure that your team can afford that time. If they can't afford, if they can't sustain, if they don't have the protection, then don't do this strategy and stay with your team and help them survive as a group of 3 instead of breaking off. This is most effective when you've already been separated from your team. Most teams in Apex won't take the time to look around and see who else may be on that team. They're just going to focus on people they see right away and assume that it's at most that amount of people. This also ties into never assume that they're solo. Just because you see one person does not mean they don't have a full team. Most of the time, especially in pubs, there's always that one teammate that's running way too far ahead of the rest of the team. So you might have one person now and 2 more people later. If your team is in a fight and the other team doesn't expect you, then instead of joining them immediately, consider going for a flank. Make sure that your team won't die while you do this. This can end up completely killing your squad, so make sure that you do it only when you have the confidence to see it through. This also means in ranked, keeping with this decision, if you go for the flank, stay on the flank and let your team fight the way that they fight. It may mean having to leave them behind, letting the banners time out, and going for the RP. And that's it. You made it to the end. Thank you everyone for coming by. I really appreciate it. If you had a good time here, if you liked the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. We're trying to promote the channel as much as we can, and every single like, every single comment, every single share, every single sub means so much to us right now. And if you want to come watch us do all this live on Twitch, then please come do so. We're at 93 follows on Twitch. We're so close to getting 100, and it would be insane to be able to do that in less than 3 months. I'm really looking forward to that. If you had a good time, if you thought this video was helpful, please continue to watch the rest of the tutorial series. We do have a lot of really cool info out already, and we have more advanced tips coming out later. If you have an idea or suggestion for a tutorial video that you would like to see, leave a comment on this video or join our Discord and leave a suggestion over there. As always, I hope you learned something, so don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Check out the VOD channel for past live streams and follow us on Twitch to watch us live.